This will be a fun conversation, I hope, today with, if not some hot takes, certainly some warm takes about the role of innovation teams, what innovation teams are good for and what they are not good for. Along the way, we're going to give you some content. You want to have your phones ready to take a look at some QR codes I'm going to flash up in a minute with some information, a few slides in, and we'll use that during the presentation to do a self-assessment, some other things. So what's an innovation team for in 2026 is one way to frame this conversation. Another way to explain it, get to the punchline, is playing the infinite game and what it means to play the infinite game, how innovation teams help corporations do that. And the summary, which I'll come back to over and over, is that innovation teams help corporations endure, become resilient by gathering knowledge, not by creating wealth. We'll explain more what that means in this presentation. Just a quick word on Elliott Partners. We work with corporations to help corporations launch venture studios and what we call advantage startups. These are external venture-backed startups in partnership with tier one VCs that grow quickly with world-class entrepreneurs, right incentives to, along the way, solve important problems that the corporations are facing, help corporations learn in ways that might be hard to do inside the governance systems, incentive systems of corporations. So let's get into it. We'll talk about three things today. We'll talk first about the infinite game. What does that mean? How do we play the infinite game? Why does it matter? We'll talk about how innovation teams help corporations prepare for the future. And then we'll talk about a little bit about metrics and how to think about metrics, because the metrics impact in a lot of ways what success is for an innovation team and how corporations executives think about the role of the innovation team, whether that team is succeeding or not. All right, so I warned you this was coming up. A couple of QR codes if you'd like. What we're going to do on the left-hand side, there's a QR code for a workbook that goes along with this presentation. You're welcome to download that. Within the workbook, there is a self-assessment that is linked in the QR code on the right. We will use that during this presentation. We'll take a minute in the middle to do a self-assessment. So I'll put this back up. Also in the workbook, if you want to download that workbook, there's another infinite QR code. There's a QR code in the workbook that takes you to a free copy of my audiobook, if you wish, for The Illusion of Innovation is the book, which explains why a lot of the activity that we pursue inside of corporations, the name of innovation, is actually, to put it bluntly, a waste of time and money. And we can be better. Now, there are better ways to do it. The trick is to enable corporations to run more small experiments, ideally outside the constraints of the governance and incentive systems that are used to run scale organizations. The book explains that more. If you'd like to listen to my voice during your workouts, there's a link to the audiobook in that workbook. All right, so hopefully in a minute, again, I'll flash this up again a couple more times in the presentation when it becomes handy. Let's talk first about the infinite game. This is a topic many of you are probably familiar with. The infinite game, James Carse wrote a book about this a few years ago, wonderful book. Not his idea originally. Many people have written top books on this. Simon Sinek is another one. The infinite game versus a finite game. What is an infinite game? Infinite games are played not to win, but to ensure the ongoing evolution, perpetuation of the game for the benefit of all players involved. And famously, James Carse described business as an infinite game, where the goal is to continue playing for as long as you can, as long as all the players are benefiting. Corporations that understand this endure for a really long time, and along the way, in part because they endure and society permits them to endure, it's because they're creating surplus for society as they go. One of the chapters in my book is on the world's longest lived corporations, many of which have been around for more than 1,000 years. The oldest company in the world was founded 100 years after the fall of the Roman Empire and succumbed to acquisition in 2006. So when we think about playing the infinite game, we can have tremendous impact on society and create benefits for those even centuries who might come centuries from now. I don't know about you, but that sounds like a worthy endeavor for me. And when I think about business as better played as an infinite game, for that reason, because we want to maximize impact. Now, here's the interesting thing. In today's world, corporations, ironically, on average, have more capital than ever, but are also going out of business faster. And this is ironic. You think if companies were making more money, they'd be enduring for longer. The opposite is true. And if you look across corporate balance sheets, this is the US, only over $7 trillion now on corporate balance sheets. It's a signal that corporations have gotten very good at managing their operations to maximize profitability. In other words, corporations are optimized for capital efficiency, very capital efficient, very good at throwing off cash. At the same time, lifespans on average for corporations are shrinking. This doesn't mean they're going bankrupt, but it means they're getting acquired, they're merging, they're ceasing to exist as independent entities. The average lifespan of S&P 500 companies is shrinking. What we can learn from this is that capital efficiency is not correlated likely with long-term resilience and endurance. And one of the reasons is that we get better and better at managing for capital efficiency in our corporations. Corporations are optimized for mistake avoidance, optimized for safety, for making things as predictable as possible. And along the way, we don't make those mistakes that lead to lessons and surprises and the learning that we need to think about the world differently. And as a result, as the world changes around corporations, they are becoming less capable of dealing with those changes. And we know that change is happening faster than ever. It's more important that corporations be able to learn in this environment, or they will cease to exist. And that's what we see happening. Despite record amounts of capital production, we see shorter lifespans for companies. Now, let me compare this to some lessons from history. This is not my idea. I'd highly recommend the book. In fact, anything that David Deutsch has written. Some of you may be familiar with his writings. He's the famously referred to as the inventor of quantum computing, but kind of a philosopher, many ideas. One of his ideas, if you go back through history and look at past civilizations, here's a picture from Egypt. Past civilizations all failed for the same reason. And they failed because they lacked the knowledge and the wealth with which to deal with problems that arose. And what I mean by that is problems stacked up for these civilizations in the form of internal political strife or invading people or natural disasters. These problems stacked up until a problem arose that was so difficult or challenging, the civilization lacked the knowledge to solve the problem and or lacked the wealth with which to deal with the problem. And as a result, those civilizations failed. The same is true of companies. Companies, of course, fail because they run out of money. There's the simple answer. But the truth is companies fail because crises arrive, problems arise, and the companies lack the knowledge and the wealth with which to deal with those problems. As those problems stack up, ultimately a problem comes that's so big and so important the corporation cannot deal with it because we don't know how to deal with it, or we don't have the wealth to solve it, even if we know what to do. And so if you think about the trick to endurance in civilizations and the trick to endurance in corporations, is to gather as much knowledge and wealth as you can. If you want to build a resilient institution, corporation, civilization, your goal should be to gather as much knowledge and wealth as possible so that you can deal with any problem that might arise. And that's the key to playing the infinite game. If you want the game to endure and you want to play for a very long time, you want to gather knowledge and wealth as much as possible to deal with any problem that might come your way, especially those problems that we can't yet predict, and there are many of them. Here's the thing about problems. Again, this is building on David Deutsch in his book, The Beginning of Infinity, which I can't recommend highly enough. It's a hard book to read. You can read it 3 pages at a time if you're like me, but it will change the way that you think the world works if you haven't read it already. In that book, David Deutsch explains, number one, problems are inevitable. We can't avoid problems. You think about how we run our corporations. Many of our corporations have a stance of problem avoidance. The goal is to avoid problems. We want to avoid error making. We want to make everything as predictable and safe as possible because it feels like that will lead to preservation of the corporation. In fact, the opposite is true. Problems are inevitable. They are going to come our way. The good news is that all problems are solvable within the laws of physics, of course. So there's a problem that you're seeing and you're not understanding what the solution is going to be. As long as the laws of physics say that problem is solvable, it is. We just don't have the knowledge yet or the wealth with which to deal with that problem. And what we ought to do is look at problems as beneficial. To the extent they lead to new solutions or new knowledge, problems are actually beneficial drivers of progress. It's these problems that come our way that lead to leaps, that help us to understand the world better, that lead to new solutions. This is true at a civilizational level. It's true inside of companies as well. We should embrace problems inside our companies because it's in solving those problems that we uncover secrets, new ways of thinking about the world, secrets the rest of the world may not even know yet, and certainly our competitors may not understand or know. This is what helps us to build resilience in our companies. And so rather than take a stance of problem avoidance, we should adopt a stance of problem readiness in our companies, in our personal lives too. Now, here's where the role of innovation teams comes into this. The role of innovation teams within corporations is different from the role of the core business. It's often confused, and this is where corporations go wrong. The operating business, the job of the operating business is to generate wealth. And we do that by operating that business in a capital efficient way to generate the profit that we need to gather wealth. The operating business prepares the company for future problems that might arise by gathering wealth and doing it in a capital efficient way. That is a good thing. What the operating business is not good at is gathering knowledge about the future. The operating business is very good at gathering knowledge about the world as it exists right now, about the way that we run the company and running that company more efficiently. The innovation team, on the other hand, can play an important role in preparing the company for future problems by gathering knowledge and surfacing insights that then help the operating business run better and be better prepared for the future, that help the operating business create optionality for the future and lessons that help it to be better prepared. Innovation teams fail when their focus shifts from knowledge gathering to wealth accumulation. And many of you have seen this inside of companies where the innovation team often gets assigned a goal. For example, the corporation says, we have a $5 billion revenue gap in the next 3 years. And innovation team, we want you to close $3 billion of that gap. That is a very bad objective or goal for the innovation team and is likely going to lead to failure. The innovation team is not a good tool for gathering wealth. The innovation team is a good tool for gathering knowledge that the operating business can then use to gather wealth. The way I think about this, I remember years ago meeting with one of the senior executives of a very large CPG company. At the time, they were doing about $85 billion a year in revenue. And I remember this executive explaining to me how the market expected them to generate about $8 billion in new revenue in the next year. And this is a company that kind of owned their shelves in the grocery store. Figuring out each year where they're going to come up with $8 billion in net new revenue is not an easy task to do. And so they were doing all kinds of innovative things and doing it quite well, actually, a long track record of success to their credit. And one way to think about that $8 billion in new revenue next year is you could think about how do we take our existing $85 billion and grow that by 8, or you could think about how do we generate net new things that create $8 billion in revenue in 1 year. The latter is an almost impossible task. If you look at some of the top performing startups in history and their ability to generate revenue in a short amount of time, I often joke when I'm working with innovation teams that have a lofty revenue target for their goal, it's the revenue target's larger than Google's revenue. One of the fastest growing businesses in history, that revenue target is larger than what Google did in the first few years of its business. And the innovation team's expected to do that sometimes with part-time help inside the confines of the corporation. It's just not a realistic objective for an innovation team. A much better goal is to have the innovation team focus on knowledge gathering and to organize your metrics and objectives and definition of success around knowledge gathering, as long as that knowledge finds its way back into the operating business so that the operating business can go from 85 billion to 93 billion and grow by entering new markets, adjacent products and things like that. So that's the big point. Operating businesses are good at gathering wealth. Innovation teams are good at gathering knowledge. It's not quite as neat and clean as that. There's, of course, overlap between the two. But if you can think about the roles of the different parts of the organization along those lines, you're much more likely to see success. And you're much more likely to build a business that's going to endure for a very long time. You're going to be much more successful at playing the infinite game and being prepared for problems that are going to arise, inevitably, especially problems that we can't yet predict. All right. So preparing for the future. Here's the thing. There is no data about the future. And a lot of times it's spent inside of large corporations trying to figure out what the future is going to look like. We study trends and buy research reports. All of that data tells us about the past. It doesn't tell us about the future. The only data that we can find about the future, it's the data that we create. We create data about the future by taking action. And you take action in the form of experiments to convert assumptions into knowledge. Action creates data about the future. And so as an innovation team, if your goal is to gather knowledge about the future on behalf of the operating business, your job then is to take action, to run experiments that help you gather data, create data about the future, data that we don't have yet. The only way we discover the future is by taking action. And so the role of innovation teams is a really important one. It should be action-oriented. It's not about studying trends. It's about building things and seeing what happens. So how do organizations gather knowledge? What we've seen, we learn lessons from how innovation works in nature. When you look at really resilient systems in nature, for example, the Amazon ecosystem, you think about how life has grown and expanded and thrived and become extraordinarily resilient in the Amazon ecosystem is through a form of innovation. Mutations happening at the level of cells and organisms in that ecosystem, and that leads to an explosion of different forms of life that creates resilience in an ecosystem that's going to be around for a long time. Inside those systems, what we see is that they don't innovate with objectives. There are constraints. In the Amazon ecosystem, for example, there's only a certain amount of light and water and food and air that organisms have to compete for, and that competition helps the most resilient organisms to thrive and survive. But there are no objectives. There's nobody setting some lofty goal saying we need to close this revenue gap or we need to build an organism that can do X, Y, or Z. It's a form of experimentation within the constraints. Inside a company, we have constraints. An innovation team should be given clear and firm constraints around time and capital that they have to play with. And then the goal for that innovation team is to go run as many experiments as possible at the lowest possible cost per experiment, cost in terms of capital and time. Rule number 2 we see in nature and inside of organizations that are very good at innovating is that experimentation happens at the margins. As I mentioned, in the Amazon jungle, the experimentation happens at the levels of cells and organisms. It's not centralized. I remember an innovation executive telling me once, we are very good in our company at failing slowly and at scale. In fact, it's not what you want to do. And often what we see inside corporations, innovation, even when it's successful, it ends up being very expensive. Certainly when it fails, it's very expensive because of the distraction, the opportunity cost, and so on. So you want to push experimentation out to the margins. What is the cellular equivalent or the organism equivalent inside your corporation? In our business model, we view startups as fantastic experiment engines where you can push these experiments out beyond the edge of the corporation in a way where if the startup fails, the corporation's fine. Similarly, in the Amazon, if an individual mutated organism fails, too bad for the organism, the ecosystem's fine. On the other hand, if that mutation succeeds, the ecosystem is poised to adopt it. Similarly, inside a corporation that is actively very good at building startups outside, and that's one form of experiment. There are many forms of experiments. When those experiments succeed, the organization is poised to adopt it and let those winning mutations or innovations proliferate. So experiment at the margins, don't centralize it. We often see inside of companies, innovation teams are focusing on the quantity of their things they're looking at, looking at the quality, not the quantity, meaning we're trying to make bets on 3 or 4 things rather than running a bunch of experiments and seeing what happens. You're going to be much more successful doing the latter. In our world of venture investing, we talk about power laws all the time. If you're investing in a portfolio of startups, you want to invest in as many as you can in order to trip power laws. Power law returns is where 1 or 2 things pay for the whole portfolio. It's a similar thing when you're doing innovation inside a corporation. It's very hard to predict ahead of time which insights are going to matter the most. Therefore, you need to gather as many as you can, and you do that by running cheap experiments at the margins. And if you do that well, that novelty, that knowledge compounds over time. The best experiments lead to more experiments. The worst experiments confirm what we already know. They confirm our existing business model. They confirm what the corporation believes about how the world works. The best experiments challenge the status quo. They challenge our thinking and lead to more experiments. That novelty that knowledge compounds over time. And if we do it right, it is what helps us to learn and ultimately create serendipity for an organization. And here's what this looks like if you're doing it well. If you're running a lot of experiments, you're running those experiments inexpensively, quickly, and in domains that challenge the status quo, those experiments are going to uncover anomalies, surprises about how the world works, ways your business model and the way it exists might not be fit for the future. Those anomalies lead to knowledge. Now we understand the future a little bit better. That knowledge generates insights. And if you gather enough insights, some of those insights are going to pay off and create serendipity on behalf of the organization. And so the key to creating serendipity, success, long-term resilience then is a strategy of continual experimentation, running as many experiments as you can at the cheapest cost per experiment and doing that at the margins. This is the goal. This is the way to gather knowledge on behalf of the organization that then helps the operating business gather more wealth and prepare the organization for any problem that might come in the future. Here's the kind of one way to think about the difference between an innovation team and the operating business as well. Inside a corporation, the operating business is optimized for frequency of correctness. Executives are promoted and learn never to be wrong inside a corporation. Always be right, be frequently right. Innovation teams should be optimized. Incentives, metrics, everything should be aligned with magnitude of correctness. Innovation teams should have permission to be wrong a lot, as long as when they are right, the outcomes are spectacular. The same is true in venture investing. The same is true in startups. In our world of startups and venture investing, we optimize incentives and governance for magnitude of correctness. We expect and hope that the entrepreneurs in our portfolio will make a lot of mistakes. And as they make those mistakes, they will ultimately uncover some things that work and learn new things about the world. They will uncover secrets that enable them to build powerful businesses. So magnitude of correctness versus frequency of correctness. The challenge arises in corporations when innovation teams are given governance and incentive systems that are optimized for frequency of correctness. In other words, innovation teams are expected to use the same processes, governance, talent, incentives that the scale organization uses to run the operating business focused on gathering wealth. We run into problems when that happens. Okay. Self-assessment. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a minute. I'm going to flash this QR code up again. This one on the right here. And if you go to that QR code with your phone, what it will do is it'll take you to a self-assessment that'll take about 3 to 4 minutes. And what the self-assessment does is going to help you score how your organization does. How is your innovation function in your organization doing when it comes to gathering knowledge? Are you oriented toward gathering wealth or gathering knowledge? So go ahead and do the assessment, and we'll come back in a minute and see how y'all did. Okay. As we are going, go ahead and drop your score in. When we've done this in the past, we've had a range of outcomes. The highest score we ever had was a 97, 98, something like that. Which I was like, that's an organization that is on top of it when it comes to innovation. We should be expecting great things and long-term resilience if they can keep that up. And we've had scores down in the teens and 20s as well. So quite the range. And this isn't scientific, of course, but it's meant to provoke some thought and to help you consider our innovation function. Is it oriented toward preparing for future problems or for gathering wealth in the way the world works right now? And hopefully it gives you some ideas about ways that you might be able to reorient or improve the performance of your innovation team and orient it more toward problem solving, gathering knowledge on behalf of the organization rather than gathering wealth. One of the key ways to do this is to ensure that your metrics are aligned with this approach and this understanding. One of the ways innovation teams get shut down quickly is often simply because the definition of success is off. Innovation teams might be doing a great job experimenting and learning, but if the executives don't believe that's the goal, and that's not what's being measured, innovation teams get shut down. And so when you think about the metrics in your organization, you want to make sure that the metrics that you are using are oriented toward knowledge gathering, that you're defining success as the ability of the innovation team to convert assumptions into knowledge about the future on behalf of the operating business. So good metrics focus on that conversion of assumptions to knowledge. They focus on how quickly you are learning. They focus on outcomes, not activities or inputs. The bad metrics are the metrics that we use to run the core operating business, things like near-term return on invested capital, speed of capital return related to that, and focus on our activities rather than the outcomes. This is very simplified, but you can define a system of metrics that are oriented and organized around knowledge gathering. And that's maybe a topic for another day to go into depth on that. If you are curious about ideas for metrics that help organizations orient their innovation teams around knowledge gathering, shoot me a note and I'd be happy to share with you some of the best practice metrics that we've seen that do this. But the key thing is make sure your metrics are defining how the organization, how the innovation team goes and gathers knowledge. Now, this is one of the least used metrics, but also one of the most useful metrics I've ever seen organizations use. The very best metric for an innovation team that I can imagine is the extent to which external corporations and venture capitalists, other investors, are clamoring to invest in the things you're building, in your innovations. Now, this presupposes a couple of things. Number one, that you've got a structure that enables other organizations, entities, individuals to invest in the things that you're building. It doesn't mean you were allowing them to, but there's at least a possibility that's true. And secondly, that these things are obvious. You've got a way for them you've got a way to shine a spotlight on them. External venture building, this is a very easy thing to do. In our model, when we're building these startups outside, we let the market tell us how much these things are worth. That external validation is proof that you've uncovered knowledge that the market didn't yet have. And another way to think about the success of startups and what makes startups valuable, every good startup, in the words of Peter Thiel, has uncovered a secret about the future. And the value, another way of understanding that value that the market is assigning, is the value of the underlying secret that the startup has uncovered. And that secret might be some new technology. It might be some new distribution channel. It might be some new network access to customers and so on. These secrets can take many forms. Those are all forms of knowledge that these startups have gathered, in which the market says that you've uncovered something that the rest of the market didn't know yet. And that's valuable to us. And so having that external validation is a way to determine whether you are truly uncovering secrets, whether you are truly uncovering new knowledge about the future that the world didn't yet have. And I can't think of a better way to put a value on the effort of an innovation team than this. Again, you can think about orienting the work of your innovation team to enable this type of assessment from external investors. Doesn't mean you need to accept it, but when you do, it can work spectacularly well. But it's a way to understand whether the things you're building really are you really gathering new knowledge, or are you just building on helping the operating business, doing things that could be done inside the operating business, maybe even more effectively than could be done in the innovation team. The innovation team's goal is to gather knowledge. The market can help you determine whether you are actually gathering that knowledge. We've seen examples of this in our portfolios. This is one just recently on my mind because they just closed a seed round. This was a startup that we launched with a corporation to address a supply chain issue that the corporation had. And we had a very firm initial idea about what the solution was going to be. We're going to build software to help the corporation manage its static supply chain risk, effectively to determine the likelihood that the parts we need on Tuesday are going to show up on Tuesday. And we got a startup. We put a good founding team in place to run this company around that initial hypothesis. And within 6 months, they realized that software was not the right way to solve this problem, that there was a better way. And they created a marketplace for manufacturers to trade excess inventory and old parts. And tripped into a much more valuable opportunity than we had realized, than working with the corporation. What we understood, they uncovered a secret about the way the world works. They uncovered a secret about the future. And tier one investors, including other strategics, now look at this company and say, you've learned something that we didn't know before, and we want to participate in it. This becomes a really powerful metric for the innovation team inside that corporation now, to be able to look and point and say, look, other people, other companies, other tier one venture investors are looking at this thing that we built and saying, this is a thing of tremendous value. And ultimately, as this company scales, it can go in many directions. It might go back to the corporation we launched it with. It might exit somewhere else. Either way, the corporation is gathering strategic and financial returns from this activity. They've learned a powerful new way to manage their supply chain because of the work of the startup. that is saving them a lot of money inside their internal operations, helping the operating business gather more wealth as a result. So as you're thinking about the metrics in your business, think about how we think about 3 categories of metrics. Metrics around how much are we learning, metrics around how much is the innovation team creating future strategic optionality for the corporation. And what matters a lot in the type of work that we all do is momentum. And you can actually construct metrics around the ability of the innovation team to just generate momentum. Are we doing more, moving faster than we were in last year? Momentum matters a lot in the building new things business. So to wrap up, now before we go to questions, innovation teams can produce amazing results on behalf of corporations as long as they're oriented and focused on gathering knowledge. They're almost never good at gathering wealth and shouldn't be directed at that goal. And if you can separate the two with your executive teams in terms of defining success and setting up metrics, you're gonna be a lot better off, and you're much more likely to create impact, help your organization be prepared for future problems, and play the infinite game.